Welcome to Come Follow Me. Today we're going to talk about Alma 30.
Good. Tough chapters. Tough chapters.
It's funny. We only have 2 chapters this week, but they're full of so much.
They are. There's a lot to talk about.
One
a
of them
lot
is
to
like
talk about.
60 verses.
They are long chapters, but it's still only 2. All right, so we've got our third Antichrist of the Book of Mormon. I think we have to remember when we're looking at the Book of Mormon, it's written for our day, and the reason that Mormon thought to put these 3 antichrists in here and give so much of what they taught is because we face the same things today. And so it's extremely important for us to recognize that. And President Benson taught us that very clearly. And he even mentioned in a talk that there are 5 specific antichrists that he warned parents about to warn their children about, their philosophies and their ideas. And just really quickly, those 5 modern antichrists. Karl Marx, that's our philosophy of communism, socialism. That's really crept into our society a lot. We have more communist and socialist ideas in our country than people realize until they start looking at what it should be and what communism is. So that's crept in a lot. John Dewey. Now,
Father of our modern education.
He is the father of modern education, but he's the father of breaking the educational model that worked. He is responsible for the humanist part of education. He's responsible for trying to remove God from education. He actually said something that was true. He said, children look to their mothers for guidance and their fathers for acceptance. Therefore, we need to remove them from that influence. That's really sad. Very, very sad. And then, of course, Charles Darwin. That's the theory of evolution. We even have Korihor teaching some of this theory of evolution today. He talks about the survival of the fittest. That is an evolutionary theory. Exactly the opposite. If you think of the battle lines that we're fighting today, the truth is women and children first. Care for those who are weak. Care for those who have need. Not from the state level, on the individual level, in a community, within your church. So Charles Darwin's theories have really crept in. Sometimes we don't even know we're quoting Darwin. And then, of course, we have John Keynes and his economic theories, trickle-down economics. You guys don't know what that is, but some of the parents listening will. His theories are not theories that are true philosophies. They're anti-Christ. And then, of course, Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud is psychoanalysis. And we have so much of that today. Instead of turning to the Savior, we try to turn to this psychoanalysis things and the theory of me as opposed to God and being his children. And so we have these 5 antichrists today, and if you understand who they are, then it would be much easier to recognize where their teachings have crept in. But we don't always know what it was that came from them. Really good book I read a few years ago. It's written by a man named Dave Breese, Breese, and it's called 7 Men Who Rule the World from the Grave. Well, 5 of those 7 I just listed. Because they're dead, they're gone, and yet their teachings and their philosophies continue to affect our society. What happened in Nephite society? Sherem, Nahor, Korihor. Did their theories and teachings and philosophies continue to affect the Nephite society?
Yes.
To the
Even
destruction.
To their destruction at the very end. Those things kept coming about. So it is so important for us to recognize truth from error. Truth is found in your scriptures, true principles, as opposed to philosophies of men. Have to know these things. And so the verse that I think would be really good for us to memorize this week is in chapter 30, verse 7. And Emma, you said you wanted to share that.
Yes, chapter 30, verse 7 says, Now there was no law against a man's belief, for it was strictly contrary to the commandments of God, that there should be a law which should bring men onto equal grounds.
Unequal grounds. Okay? No law to bring us onto unequal grounds. This goes back to our 5,000-year leap. The principles that this country was founded upon. that our founding fathers put into our Constitution. All men are created equal, equal before God, equal before the law. Obviously, different gifts and talents and situations and circumstances, but all men are created equal, right? And then along with that, that's principle 6. Principle 7 is that we are to have equal rights, but that doesn't mean we're supposed to have equal things. We shouldn't be redistributing the wealth, right? The government shouldn't be able to come and take what I have to give to another. I can choose to give. And I personally believe if we paid less taxes, we'd be an even more charitable people. But even still, we are some of the most charitable people in the world. And then to balance that, you've got principle 20, which is efficiency and dispatch require government to operate according to the will of the majority rights. Okay? However, constitutional provisions must be made to protect the rights of the minority. There will always be a minority, somebody who doesn't, and I'm not talking about different races, I'm talking about minority in thought or feeling, right? You have to have protection for those people, but you must operate according to the will of the majority. So here we have a Korihor, and he comes in and he begins teaching false doctrine, Antichrist doctrine. And he literally teaches there would be no Christ. You find that first starting in verse 12. If we go into verse 13, he talks about that they're held down by the foolish traditions of their fathers. Do you know what they say about our founding fathers?
That they were foolish and that their constitution worked for their time but is now outdated.
Outdated, foolish traditions, right? And what happens when you begin to denigrate those who came before, who are your founders? You unravel the fabric of society. So if you believe that the Constitution is outdated, and that thought process and that argument began at the beginning of the 1900s, even as far back as the late 1800s, people were beginning to unravel that tapestry of the Constitution. And it just continues to unravel. But what people don't realize is that these men were inspired by God. We learned that in the Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith taught that to us. And so we begin to see the rewriting of history. And we actually see this rewriting of history not just in American history or world history. We even see it sometimes with our church history. A lot of people wonder, why are so many people struggling with their faith right now? We are hearing things taught as truth about our history that are actually the anti-Mormon lies that have been leveled against us since Joseph Smith's time. They're being treated as truths. And those things cause people to really have a crisis in their faith. And so I brought this book in today, this Faith Crisis book. I know a couple of you are reading it, and we talk about it a lot here in our home. But if you at home have someone that you are concerned about, someone whose faith is dwindling and they are struggling, you may find that part of what they're dealing with is that they've been taught things about our history that aren't true, that cause them to wonder if the church is true. And if you think Joseph Smith is a liar, would you believe the church was true? You wouldn't. You'd walk away from it. If you believe that he did things that are not becoming a prophet, would you continue to follow him? You wouldn't. Because that isn't what you'd want to have faith in, right? And the things that he taught, of course, would come from him. So this Faith Crisis book is a very, very important book. And it is really, really doing a lot of good. So if you find that you've got some people that you need help in reaching, or you want to understand why they're struggling with their faith, that book is one that I would definitely go to. But that's one of the lies of Korihor, is these are foolish traditions from your fathers. There's no Christ. These are foolish traditions. There's no such thing as prophecy. You can't know what's going to come. Do people still believe in prophecy and revelation? Some. But does most of the world? No.
It's interesting because this is when you first see him contradict himself. Because he says, there will be no Christ. But you can't know the future, so that you can't say that there will be one.
And when Alma calls him on it, he backpedals a little bit. Well, I'm not saying there won't be, but I don't believe there will be. I don't think you can know. Right? But with that, if there's no Christ, and these are foolish traditions of your fathers, and there's no such thing as prophecy, well then there's no sin because there's no redemption. You can do whatever you want. And he teaches, this is in verse 17, every man fared in this life according to the management of the creature. Therefore every man prospered according to his genius, and every man conquered according to his strength. There's your survival of the fittest right there. Only the strong survive. The smartest, the strongest, the prettiest, whatever, right? The most popular, survival of the fittest. That is a Charles Darwin theory of evolution, false philosophy. Here it is right here in Korihor. Do we have any new lies? Mm-mm. We don't have any new lies. They just keep getting recycled. And then he teaches in that last part, whatsoever man did was no crime. And so he himself is sinning and breaking the law because the things that he's doing are against the law. Because he talks about leading them into wickedness and whoredoms. And then he taught, of course, when you're dead and you don't get resurrected, so that doesn't matter what you do. And the people are beginning to follow this. So he ends up, he's in Jershon, they take him before their chief judge and their high priest, and they just ship him out of the land. Do you have the right to do that?
Yes.
Okay. He ends up in Gideon.
But the reason they had the right to do that was because he was disturbing their peace.
Disturbing their peace.
Breaking the law.
Breaking the law.
So
all those things.
Sometimes when you read this, it doesn't seem to make much sense why they're just tying him up and taking him to their high priest.
Do they have a right to put him in court, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to look back a little bit. He is breaking their laws. He is breaking their laws. Because in their laws, whoredoms are against the law. They are against the law. So he is not only breaking the law, but encouraging others to do the same. That's treasonous. That's even worse than breaking the law. Not quite as treasonous as Amalickiah.
No.
We'll get to him later. Now, he heads over to Gideon. Remember, the people of Gideon were some of the people Alma didn't have to work so hard with to bring them, they were keeping the commandments. They're still keeping the commandments. What do? Take him before the chief priest and the high priest and the chief judge. And they begin to question him. Now, here's a question for you. How do you know when to answer someone's questions? Because Korihor's questions are not honest searching. His questions are simply to engage in a fight and a battle.
It is something that you have to rely on for the Spirit to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to cause some kind of good by answering these questions, then it would be right to answer them. But if he's just looking for a fight and no good is going to come from it, it's best to just hold your peace.
Right. And you'll maybe look a little weak if you won't answer the questions and say, oh, well, you don't have the answer, so, right? Because he goes on and on and on. He tells more of the things that he believes, and you're holding people down, you're glutting themselves on their labors. I mean, just lies. Flat out lies. I actually applaud this high priest for his ability to go, not important, not answering your questions. Because what does he say? When he saw the hardness of his heart and that he would revile even against God, they would not make any reply. They caused him to be bound and delivered up to the officers, and they sent him straight to Zarahemla. So we're going to the highest court of the land. This is Supreme Court time, right? Highest court of the land. The chief judge of the whole land and the high priest Alma.
High priest over the entire church, not just that particular area.
Yes. This is a civil court and a church court all at the same time. Interesting, isn't it? But he probably is a one-time member of the church. And if not, he's still doing damage to the church. So they're there, right? And he goes on and on and on and on, and he's talking to Alma. Alma answers him. Yeah.
Also, he talks to them again about how they glut themselves on the work of the people. And Alma calls him on it. He's like, I haven't even been home because I've been preaching the word of God. And I have not received the smallest amount of pay. I have still had to come home and work just as hard or harder than everyone else to provide myself food.
Yep. So why do you say that we're glutting ourselves on the people? So You know, he goes back and forth. You believe that we deceive this people that causes them so much joy? Yes, you do. What?
Huh.
Believest thou there is a God? Korihor says, no. Will you deny him again that there is a God and also deny the Christ? For behold, I say, I know there is a God and also that Christ shall come. And then he turns it around, okay? This is an important skill. The person asking the questions controls the situation. He turns straight to Korihor. He says, what evidence do you have that there is no God? This is when he backpedals. He says, you have none save it be your word only. He says, I have all things as a testimony. I love how he defends God. All things denote there is a God. Because what does he talk about? He talks about how the planets move in their space and everything on the earth denotes that there is a God. But he just tells him, you're possessed with a lying spirit. You've put off the Spirit of God. Can we do that if we're not careful? We do when we sin. We do when we break the commandments of God. And it's such a sadness. And you know, the interesting thing to me is as you study Alma, you recognize that he is not liking what Korihor is doing. He may even have righteous anger over it, but his preference would still be to see Korihor turn his life around.
But it's interesting also because what you see is when he questions Alma, when he's trapped, what does he say? And now Korihor said unto Alma, if thou wilt show me a sign, then I may believe.
Prove it.
Anytime they're trapped in their own words, it becomes, prove it.
Yeah.
And that's when he talks about, you've got all the signs you need. All the signs you need. And what happens?
He pushes harder. He's like, prove it.
So he says again, you know, if you want to deny him again, he of course says, I do not deny the existence of a God, but I do not believe that there is a God. And except you show me a sign, I will not believe. This has got to be dumbfounding to Alma. He's like, you really going to push this envelope? He says, all right, this will I give unto thee for a sign. Thou shalt be struck dumb according to my words. And I say that in the name of God ye shall be struck dumb, that ye shall have no more utterance. And that's exactly what happens. Now the chief priest or chief judge steps in.
I think it's interesting at this part because instead of talking to Korihor, he writes to Korihor.
I know. Did his ears stop working too when he can't talk? I always wonder about that part. Like that's a question I have to ask when I get to heaven.
Because like he writes to Korihor, he's like, "Do you still believe that there's that there's no God? Because how else would you explain this?"
And who would you like Alma to show his sign in? Should he afflict someone else for your lack of belief?
I think that's also interesting that he's like, do you think we're going to go afflict somebody else for your own sake? It's going to happen to you.
Yeah. Now, at this point, Korihor has to, recognize that he's done something wrong. And he even says, I always knew, but the devil appeared to me as an angel, and I believed him, and I taught his words so much that I began to believe these words myself. Will you take this off of me?
No.
Why not?
No, because, if he did, he would just go and be like, now I'm free, now I can start doing it again and lead more people down this path.
Yeah, exactly.
And Alma says, I will not do it. It'll be between you and the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, it shall be unto thee even as the Lord will. And it's not taken off. He goes from house to house begging. What does chief priest do? Chief judge do here? I keep saying the wrong words.
He sends a proclamation and tells everyone not only what's happened, but how, wrong Korihor was. Mm-hmm. And then all the people recognize, and I'm not going to say they shun Korihor, but they all turn from what he taught.
Right. Right. The interesting thing about following the devil is he does not support his people in the end. When they're no longer useful to him, when they're no longer a tool for him, he removes his support. As long as you're useful to him, he'll give you power and abilities and all those things. But as soon as you're not, you're going to get dropped like a hot potato. You ever picked up a hot potato?
Yes.
It's hot.
Really?
You drop it. He'll drop you like a hot potato. As opposed to Heavenly Father, who always supports those who follow him and believe in him. Always have his support and his blessings. You can count on that. You can count on that. Now Korihor is struck dumb, and he ends up among a people called the Zoramites, and they trod him down. They actually kill him. And so right here you've got a thus we see. Now watch for those when you're reading scriptures. Thus we see is Mormon give you some commentary. He told you the story. Now he's telling you why he told it. Thus we see the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord, and thus we see that the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell. Because guess what? That's where he's going. He doesn't get to have some special reward. He'll get dragged down to the devil's kingdom.
If you've liked our videos, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell for notifications. Also, find and follow us on Facebook.